Hello and welcome to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are coming to you live in living color in the year 2024. Happy New Year to everybody listening. Happy New Year's to you, Mark. Mark, first of all, first question, is Alabama, I think I know the answer here. Is Alabama you can pop fireworks in your driveway kind of state?
Yes, you can. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's not, but people typically just
city
do it
based
anyway.
on city ordinance kind of stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely. And all the dogs love that.
It's great, absolutely great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thankful that the last dog that I had in my home could not have cared any less about fireworks. Like it's almost like he couldn't even hear them.
Yeah.
But he could hear. Trust me when I tell you. But he just fireworks didn't bug him, which was great because I know a lot of other people listening to this have a very different experience with their dogs and fireworks.
Yeah.
So I also grew up in a fireworks in your driveway state in Texas, and Harris County specifically is very lax about that. There's a fireworks stand on every street corner around this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
I, however, have all 10 of my fingers. Mark, I hope you survive New Year's with all 10 of yours.
I'm not a fireworks guy. I'm not. I mean, I had a bad experience one year. I was, I don't know, maybe early 20s, and I'm standing in my brother-in-law's front yard. Basically, we're shooting fireworks, and some random bottle rocket comes down. It's not lit anymore, but gravity's going to do its thing and pop me right on top of the head. And I'm staggering, man. It was quite the blow. And of course you're wondering, what the heck just happened? Right? Somebody hit
bottle
me.
rocket fell from the International Space Station.
And I never saw it, obviously, or I would have ducked or dodged or something. But so I had blood running down my face. I looked like I'd been in a fight. But
who knew that?
It is just stand there.
Who knew that the bottle rocket could do that kind of damage on the way back down?
Fell a long way.
Yeah, you gain enough momentum. I guess that's the way that works. Did they put you in concussion protocol? They should have.
They probably should have, and it explains a lot too.
This was probably like the 80s, 90s. I mean,
you had to be missing a finger before you would go to the ER for something like that. So.
Right. Yeah, I as a kid, sure, like the fireworks are kind of fun, but now whenever if I ever happen upon fireworks and look at what they cost, I just think about like how much. No wonder my mom hated the idea of me, buying fireworks, because it's just, I mean, they're more expensive than they should be, frankly. And although maybe the fact that they're that expensive keeps makes it to where fewer people are buying them, which might be a good thing, and might be a net positive. So but I just can't imagine spending that kind of money to. And maybe if I had kids, I'd feel differently. I don't know, but I certainly now as an adult don't have much of an interest and frankly, in also seeing fireworks.
Yeah.
If I'm at home and I can see them out my window, great. Or if I'm somewhere else and I can see them out my window, great. But I'm not driving to fireworks anymore. That's just not something that I have a lot of interest in, if I'm being honest.
And, as a sports writer who has tried to conduct many post-game interviews while fireworks popped in the background, I'm just not a fan. It's just that ship has sailed.
There are two, I joke. So fireworks is definitely a different one. I think I did have somewhere last year where there were fireworks going off behind us, but I can't remember. But the two most common sounds in the background of all my interviews, post-game interviews at college baseball games, there are two. Blower. One is the leaf blower, like, The other is the little tool they use to tamp down the dirt around the mound. It's like, right in the in the background of all my audio. That's the two official sounds of college baseball post-game interviews. Super duper fun. Speaking of 2024 things, Mark and I are going to today take a look, our first earnest look ahead at 2024. We spent a lot of time this fall at the beginning of winter looking back, talking about fall practice, talking about what we feel like we do and don't know ahead of next season. But now we're going to actually, as we flip the calendar forward, look at non-conference schedules and talk about what's interesting in non-conference schedules. Mark has a couple of big picture thoughts on some of the non-conference schedules, which I know listeners are interested in, given how good Mark is at kind of taking a look at those big picture scheduling things and how they're going to matter for teams' postseason resumes, things of that nature. So we'll talk about that. But before we get into anything else, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by PitchLogic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. So we're going to start by, I'm going to toss it to Mark here in a second. He's going to give us some general takeaways, because we both spent some time this afternoon looking at the schedules and kind of formulating some thoughts. Once we finish that, I don't know how many Mark has listed, but I've got 5 non-conference series, tournaments, events, what have you, that I'm most interested in. So we'll kind of bat those back and forth. Maybe we'll kind of ping pong it. I'm sure we have some carryover in our lists, but again, before we do any of that, Mark, give me some thoughts. You were, before we went on air, you rattled off a couple to me that I found interesting. So what were some general takeaways you have for the SEC non-conference schedules?
Well, there are a lot of home games.
You don't say.
Yeah, there are. Give you an example. Your Tennessee Vols, they open the year neutral site, those for 3 games. They do not play a road game in non-conference. They have 23 home non-conference games. And those 3 away from Lindsey Nelson are all opening weekend. So other than conference games, and they'll have 15 road games, that'll be it. So this is kind of interesting. And they're not alone. That's just the most extreme one. Arkansas has a similar setup. I think they have 22 home games in 3 neutral sites. South Carolina is similar. Theirs is they do have a few more neutral sites. But there are a lot of different teams. Mississippi State, 20 home games in non-conference. You're talking about some pretty big numbers here. Of course, LSU, they've got 20 as well. So I think that's the thing. We know how the RPI, you get the road bonus, and it's supposed to be there so teams can get the advantage, right, for going on the road playing non-conference games. And if you're in the SEC, it kind of doesn't matter, right? If you're good enough, you're going to win those games. And plus, these are the teams that make money with college baseball. So you want to play those home games, want to have those extra season ticket packages. And as a result, lots of home games. The other thing, and this is sort of related, but Kentucky got a lot of, interest last year based on how they chose to schedule, and certainly it helped their RPI to do so. They finished number 2 in the RPI and hosted a regional, right? So this year, fairly similar, not quite as drastic. Last year, there were 2 non-conference road series. This year, there's 1 non-conference road series, and it is at USC Upstate, and they, if I remember correctly, were 38-22 last year. So that's the type of RPI sweet spot that you're looking for. No guarantee. You don't know how they're going to do from year to year, but I think that those are the kinds of things that help you. And they also have a neutral site series as well. So if you're trying to position yourself to maximize your RPI, Kentucky's a pretty good. They had a lot of success last year. Not quite as drastic, dialed it back a little bit, but should still have an RPI friendly schedule. They also go to Samford. That's a midweek road trip later in the year, which is, I think it's on the way to Auburn for that series. But still, it's those are the kinds of teams that can help you from an RPI standpoint.
Yeah, Kentucky, pretty clearly, it seems to me, trying to run back last year's, and why not, right? I mean, that's not a criticism, but you have USC Upstate, good mid-major. That's a program. I did their fall report. A lot of talent on that roster. Also, just not a fun team to play. They've got some unique pieces they can hit. Like, it's an old lineup. They've got some talent on the mound, so that won't be a comfortable weekend. I mean, Kentucky went to Elon to start last year and lost on opening day. Now came back to win that series. But so you're not going to have to tell them about, possible potholes there. Lipscomb was a regional team last year. Kennesaw State is another team on their schedule.
Yeah.
That they weren't a regional team last year. But they were in 2022. And that's another team I did the fall report for. And I really, really like Kennesaw's talent this year. So we'll see about that. And then they have a tournament, and, we'll see Kansas, Washington State, Texas State, I think.
Yep.
And, who knows on those, but so clearly the idea of taking what worked last year and trying to run it back. And I certainly don't blame them for that. And on the home games piece, I mean, I think you nailed it there. It's just that it seems like we've kind of found a rhythm with SEC scheduling, with a few exceptions every once in a while. For the most part, the formula now is play in one big tournament. I mean, it seems like every team in the SEC, it's not quite true, but just about every team in the SEC is playing in one of the tournament at Minute Maid Park, a tournament at Globe Life in Arlington, or like the Frisco, Jacksonville, Round Rock, trio of tournaments. So that the formula now seems to be playing one of those tournaments and then play at home the rest of the time. Exceptions, of course, we talked about Kentucky, Mizzou because of weather, et cetera, et cetera.
And you mentioned Mizzou. I mean, if I can interrupt for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the way that they start the year is really interesting. They go to California for 2 weekends, right? So they're going to play 8 games out there, with 4 with Poly, 1 with Bakersfield, 1 with San Diego State, and 2 with UC San Diego. I mean, that's a lot of games in your first 10 days. So
and those can be tricky just because you never know going into spring practice, how many days you're going to be able to get outside. And so Mizzou might be in a situation where they haven't been on the field very much. And meanwhile, every one of those West Coast teams they play are going to have been on the field basically every day.
Yeah.
Since they got back on campus. So those West Coast teams don't necessarily have to be better than Mizzou to win those games if Mizzou's just rusty, right? Or just not quite sharp enough. So those types of trips can be tricky because there's just a difference in how physically ready you expect each team to be with stuff as simple as fly ball reads off the bat, right? So that you're right to bring that up. That's kind of fascinating. So unless you've got something else general there, Mark, as I pause to look and see if you do.
No, I mean, okay. I guess the only other thing would be Ole Miss opening at Hawaii. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Hawaii? Opening day is fun anyway, but hey, let's do it in Hawaii.
That's hitting the jackpot too. And especially because it's opening weekend, you can kind of, I don't know what their travel schedule is going to look like, but the door is open for them to get there like a little early because you're not coming off a midweek game or being on the road the previous weekend or, whatever. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to do the Hawaii trip, there's no bad time to do the Hawaii trip. Let me be clear.
Right.
But I think there's no better time than opening weekend. So that definitely is a fun trip. And Ole Miss has an interesting schedule generally. We'll talk about some other aspects of it on this podcast. I have a feeling, but yeah, that is an interesting call out there. So I think what we'll do, Mark, is I've got 5 picked out. I don't know how many you picked out or how many do you have there?
I just picked 1 for every team, and we'll see.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, we'll just navigate our way through here. So maybe let's do it kind of like we did when we rattled off our top 10 list. We'll work with my 5 to kind of keep us on track, and then you can kind of agree with what I've got or not, and then we'll kind of go from there. I think we'll be able to, pretty naturally navigate through this. So yeah. Okay, so number 5 is a place that, unless I'm outbid by another staffer at d1baseball.com for this tournament, I'm planning on being there. Auburn playing at the Jacksonville tournament as part of Peak Events, our partners at Peak Events. One of their tournaments, the one in Jacksonville, they are playing Iowa in order: Iowa, Wichita State, and Virginia. That's the second weekend of the season.
Yeah.
Fun tournament. We talked so much last couple of weeks about how we're not sure what to make of Auburn. And this will be a pretty good test, right? Basically right out of the gate. We can throw Wichita State out just because, new coaching staff there with Brian Green. They lost every major player in the portal. to a lot of big programs, by the way. So, Wichita was not a team without talent, but just don't have a clue what to expect there. Can't imagine they're going to be ready to compete with the likes of Auburn, but we'll see there. But the other two teams, Iowa and Virginia, really interesting matchups there. Iowa, we've talked about this in the main podcast when I've been on with Kendall, Aaron, and Runes. Iowa has the look of a Big Ten title contender. The pitching is incredible. And if Iowa's going to do it, this might be the year for them to win a Big Ten title. That's one of the things missing from the Rick Heller Iowa trophy case, if you will. I mean, they're always better than you think they're going to be. They've been to, a handful of regionals, which, Iowa's history says that that's a hard thing to do. And now they're starting to really crank out like high-end pitching. And Brody Brecht is the big name that I think even SEC fans will know a little bit about. Him pitching against Auburn on that first game of the weekend, like, whoo boy, that could be a lot of fun. So that's interesting there. Virginia, I think SEC fans are going to know what Virginia's about. Omaha caliber program, has won a national title. The talent, I did Virginia's fall report last year, but not this year. So I'm not as up to date on Virginia's talent as I was at this time last year, but I can guarantee you they're really talented. So, that's going to be a fun one. And that's on the last game of the weekend. So, that could potentially be a tough deal for Auburn if they end up, pitchers are still going to be on pretty decent pitch counts, I would imagine, in the second weekend of the season. So if they have to cycle through a lot of pitching to survive the first couple of days, that Sunday game against what is always a good Virginia offense is going to be a little bit tricky, I would think. Yeah. So that's number 5 on my list.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I do think it'll be, if you do get to go, that'll be a fun one to watch. Especially because Auburn, to me, has the look of a team. I mean, they've got more arms. I mean, a lot of times they're kind of piecing it together with 7, 8 guys, and sometimes they're lucky if they have that. And I think this is going to be, they're going to have double-digit guys, especially early in the year, that they want to get looks at against this kind of competition. So kind of be fun, right? You're going to get to see that deep staff. You're going to get to see Ike Irish and try to turn around 101. I think that'll be, that might be worth the price of admission right there. In a minor league ballpark, it's a nice facility. It's where they play Georgia, Florida in the fall. Been there the last couple of years. It's a cool setup. It sounds like a great trip, man. I see why you included that on your list.
Yeah, and it should be nice and warm. We're going to hope. So,
I mean, relatively compared to the rest of the country, it should be
right.
It should be good.
Okay, let's go to number 4. I'm actually going to probably let you do most of the talking on this one because I know it's a series that you've expressed interest in with this year specifically. And I should, if I could interrupt myself, I should clarify here that, there's really 2 buckets of interesting non-conference things for the SEC. One is the tournaments, and we've talked about how many of those there are. The other is rivalry series. Yeah. And so I tried to kind of mix both of those in here. Obviously the rivalry series are all kind of interesting, even when the teams aren't as good. But I did try to kind of balance those two things here. Number 4 is the South Carolina Clemson series.
Yeah.
The Reedy River rivalry, which I have to say really slowly. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Always a great series. If you're a subscriber to The Athletic, a couple of years ago, Grace Rayner, who covered Clemson for a long time, wrote a piece about this baseball rivalry. I think it was ahead of the 2022 series between the teams. And I actually got it. I didn't even know it was out there until much later and read it much later, but it was still really, really good. And a lot of fun quotes from players who have played in this rivalry through the years. So I recommend that if you've not read that, but I think there's a chance that this is as buzzy as this series has been in a while. Mm-hmm. Neither team has really totally bottomed out, but for a while there, Clemson wasn't keeping its end of the bargain, and Carolina has had a couple of years where they've struggled. It seems like there's not really been a time when both teams have been, top end contenders, and South Carolina, frankly, might not be in 2024. We'll certainly talk about that in the weeks to come, but at least on the Clemson side of things, it's a really exciting team. And I think there's going to be a lot of buzz around that program. Frankly, it's a fan base that has been kind of aching and itching to kind of get re-engaged. I feel like that's just my perception, but I think that's right. I mean, that's a big name college baseball brand, especially for like you and I, Mark, who were watching college baseball in the 90s and early 2000s, that was among the upper crust of college baseball programs there. Shout out to Khalil Green. And, it just hasn't quite been that in the last 10, 12, 15 years. It feels like that might be changing. And I think it brings a lot of excitement to the 2024 edition of this rivalry.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this looks like, one of the best non-conference matchups, of in the entire country. And then you add in the fact that it's a rivalry series, between, and all the history that's involved. I can remember covering this series, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, when I was early in my career, and showing up on a Saturday afternoon in early March and watching people scalp tickets to a college baseball game and thinking, oh boy, what have I got myself into here? This is amazing. And of course, the place was full and the teams were good and it was a great game. And so, any opportunity that you get to experience something like that, and I think obviously both teams hosted regionals last year, a lot of talent returning, some star power as well. I do think that this could be, one of the marquee series of the whole year, right? And it's happening, the third week of the year.
Yeah, third weekend of the year there. I meant to mention that when it was. It's funny that actually I talked about this series being marquee again. And in hindsight, last year's was. We just didn't know it at the time, right?
Yeah, right.
Like South Carolina, we're kind of cautiously optimistic about South Carolina at that point. They were on their way to peaking before, of course, towards the end of the season, kind of falling off mostly because of injuries. And then we just didn't know what to make of Clemson at that point. And they obviously exceeded expectation there late in the year. So last year, actually a great series in hindsight. We just didn't know it at the time. This one probably a little more interest on the front end. And hopefully it ends up living up to that as we see the results play out throughout the year. Okay, number 3, LSU playing at Minute Maid Park against Texas, Louisiana Raging Cajuns, and Texas State. That's also the third weekend of the season, as that tournament always takes place third weekend of the season. And this one is, there's on-field stuff that's interesting. Obviously, I'm interested to see that new look LSU lineup. I'm interested to see LSU's pitching against some good talent. I don't know necessarily that these teams are the ones that are going to really be the best test for LSU. I think we'll have to wait until SEC play for that to really be the case. But I do think when LSU plays in Minute Maid Park, it makes for some electric atmospheres. The LSU fans, which there are a ton of them in Houston, alums and fans for LSU in Houston. I think I heard one time that it's the largest number of LSU alumni live in Houston in any place other than Louisiana. I got kind of tongue-tied there, but you know what I mean. There's more of them in Houston than anywhere outside of the state of Louisiana. So they always turn out in that first game, that marquee game Friday against Texas. Like that's going to be peak Minute Maid. I've been to that tournament probably almost 20 times at this point in my life. And yeah, I've seen a lot of good atmospheres there, but those two teams typically and often have the best fan turnout of any teams that go there, and putting them together in the same place on the same bill, if you will, is awesome. Right. And then secondarily, I think there's going to be a lot of Cajun fans who turn out just because they're playing LSU. Like, I think that's going to be a low key good turnout. Lafayette, not that much further down the road. And so I do think there will be, it's a smaller fan base, sure, but that's a proud program, loves its baseball. So, and I think it's one of those teams that'll turn up, much like Tulane, like the fans turn up when they play LSU. So I think that could be a cool atmosphere. And then, Texas State's a good program, so, they could get pushed there as well. So not the most marquee thing, but I think for the atmospheres, I think this is going to be a kind of a can't miss deal for people.
Yeah. Couple things caught my eye there. Obviously you get Texas and LSU on the same field in Houston, and you guaranteed you're going to have a festive atmosphere. Who doesn't like to play Texas, right? That's going to be really fun, next year when Texas visits all these teams, and and it'll be interesting to see what that does to the gate. Right, it's kind of like Alabama in football, right, or Notre Dame, right? People will show up. So I do think that's interesting, and also with LSU playing Louisiana, that's the only time they play. Okay, there's no home and home, so this is it. They play during the fall, but there's they're I mean it's just down the interstate from each other, and this is it. This is the one shot at them. So that to me is it just kind of adds to the stakes. You'll have more people show up um, to this just for the opportunity to kind of like what we talked about with Texas. Anytime you get a chance to take on LSU, if you're one of these programs trying to be on the ascension, you're going to take notice, right? The casual fans are going to come out, and because of that, you're going to have more bodies in the stands, more ticket sales, more everything, right? And hopefully better games too.
At first, I will correct myself because I misspoke, and I don't want to get messages from angry Cajuns here. Lafayette actually 55 miles closer to Houston than Baton Rouge. I had those flipped, a little bit closer on I-10 to Houston from Baton Rouge. So there's that. Let me clarify that point.
Mm-hmm.
Fact checking is important here, Mark, at SEC Extra. So I had to leave with that. Cajuns quietly with some like momentum here. They've kind of quietly been in regionals in back-to-back years. And at least one of those, I'm not a Nerdcast member, so I can't quite remember, but at least one of those was an auto bid where they wouldn't have otherwise got in. That was, whatever. But it's not quite at peak operating because we've seen the Cajuns be, something under the Tony Robichaux 15, 20 years ago that was, the peak was higher. We could talk for hours about whether or not that peak is attainable again at the mid-major level, not just for the Cajuns, but for any number of programs that aren't in the power structure. But for a proud program to at least be getting back to that regional stage pretty consistently the last couple of years is a big deal. And I think it's good for college baseball in the region. So that's been cool.
Yeah. I mean, and they're in the Sun Belt, and that is, the Sun Belt is certainly one of the better leagues in the country. I mean, you can make a case. It's what number 5, number 6 in that range. I mean,
I think
depending on the year. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing: if the Pac-12 is going away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe the Big Ten with the additions of Washington, Oregon, UCLA, USC, maybe that's better. But you can at least, obviously. Yeah, SEC, ACC, Big 12, sure. Although maybe a discussion to be had about the Big 12. But regardless, those for sure. But then, Big 10 versus Sun Belt, like that's could be an interesting debate because the Big 10 is also going to have, I don't know, this is a rough estimate, 50,000 members at that point. So there is a discussion to be had about, I think the Sun Belt is probably, might be better on aggregate, but doesn't have maybe the top end of what the Big 10 does. That's obviously discussion for a later day, but your point is well taken that, the Sun Belt is at this point clearly surpassed the American as kind of being like that next in line. Basically the Conference USA slot from 10 years ago, like is essentially where they're at now. So it's a cool deal to see the Cajuns playing well again in a very good conference. Okay, number 2 on my list, Arkansas at Globe Life, second weekend of the 3 at Globe Life. They're playing Oregon State, Oklahoma State, and Michigan. Arkansas plays in one of these tournaments every year. They may have, they may have played in Globe Life every year. It seems like they turn up in that thing every year at some point. And maybe they've played in Minute Maid too during that time, but I forget. But regardless, they play in one of these deals every year. They tend to play very well in these settings. And it's 3 really good teams. Oregon State, we kind of know what that's about, program has Omaha expectations and is seeming to kind of build back in that way that since the Adley Rutschman team that won the national title, it seems like, and then they hosted the next year, it kind of seems like it, with the retirement of Pat Casey, Mitch Canham taking over, it hasn't been quite as good as they would want it to be, but still a very, very good program that I think, we haven't done preseason rankings or anything like that. I think is going to be a team that we think is a Pac-12 title contender ultimately. So that will be
Yeah, and they better win it this year because boy, does their
Oh
world
boy.
change going
Oh
forward.
boy. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. This is obviously is not a national college baseball podcast. This is an SEC podcast, but it is interesting to see what's going to happen there. Oregon State, going independent in baseball, which, they're a good enough program. I think they'll be able to cobble together some good weekends. I don't doubt that, and maybe they're able to schedule some of their old Pac-12 brethren who frankly, the ones that are in the Big Ten especially might be
Mhm.
looking for some weekends closer to home.
Yeah,
So I think there might be some opportunities there. But man, doing a whole schedule like that, just ask Dan Hefner at Dallas Baptist how, when they were independent, how difficult it can be to cobble that kind of schedule together. Now, Oregon State has an advantage over, let's say, a DBU, and that I think they're probably, have a little more spare change to do things like travel, and they obviously have more cachet than DBU did back in
mhm,
2006 or 8 or whatever. But that will be a challenge, no doubt. Oklahoma State, solid program, quietly the most consistent program in the Big 12. Did you know that, Mark? They're the, in terms of consecutive regionals, they are the leader in the Big 12. And I don't think it's
yeah,
particularly close now because we've had teams, like Texas has missed pretty recently. TCU has missed recently. Texas Tech, I think, is in that mix, but they just haven't gone on quite as long as I think they're right there with Oklahoma State. But regardless, Oklahoma State, a lot of high end talent. You know what you're going to get. They also play in atmospheres like this all the time, so that's a tough matchup there. And then Michigan, we'll see kind of what happens there. But I'm intrigued by Michigan. Just they have Tracy Smith, who took Indiana to Omaha when he was there. Obviously, coached Arizona State, recruited Spencer Torkelson and crew to Arizona State. So
mhm.
I'm kind of intrigued by what that Michigan team is going to be about. So a tough weekend there for Arkansas. Another classic weekend where, hey, if you go 2-1 at a neutral site, even a neutral site where there's going to be a lot of Hog fans, you go 2-1 in that neutral site, you feel pretty good coming out of the weekend.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that is just a great group of teams that have had, Omaha success, perennial winners, although Michigan, we'll see where they are this year. But I do think that uh, Arkansas, because of how last year ended with the early exit in the regional after the sparkling regular season, there's a lot of interest, even more so this year, to kind of, I don't know, I don't know if payback is the right word, but to take that next step and make sure that they're in a that you're doing the things in February and March that prepare you to have success in May and June. And I do think that, these are the opportunities playing teams from other leagues, different styles of play, different parts of the country. All of those things are teaching points that Arkansas can use to, early in the year, because I mean, frankly, this is their only trip away from home. Like we talked about, they're going to play a lot of non-conference home games, so that they'll definitely want to maximize what they do. That that against the two OSU's in Michigan. So I'm excited about this one, and like you, this would be really high on my list.
It's going to be a good look at a lot of those Arkansas pitchers, against
Hmm.
good offenses. Oklahoma State in particular, it's that offense tends to be pretty physical, tends to be pretty pesky, can make it for a tough matchup against, for any pitcher, frankly. But, if you have the type of day where you're just not locating, Oklahoma State can really make you pay. So it'll be a good test for a pitching staff with Arkansas that we think is going to be pretty doggone good. And, some of those guys that we're really excited about there, freshmen, Dietz, Gakel, guys
Hmm.
like that. How do they handle that moment? How do they handle those good offenses? That'll be fascinating to see, assuming that those guys are a big part of the mix whenever they arrive that second weekend.
Yep.
Okay, so my number one here is kind of a personal one, frankly. I don't know that a lot of people would have this number one, but it's a series that I love, and that's Florida at Miami. A couple things off the top that are not personal to me that are more just general statements. And one is that this rivalry is the one ACC SEC crossover rivalry among the several in this league that delivers every time.
Hmm.
It's been nationally relevant more often than not. More often than not, it delivers. And I think, and this matters when you talk about interesting rivalries, more often than not, it gets kind of chippy. These are two teams that just don't really like each other. And I think that's true in a lot of rivalries, but this one runs really hot.
Yeah.
And I put it number one though, because I have always wanted to, and look, I'm sure we'll have Walter Villa down there. You know, he's a South Florida native. I'm sure he'll be down there covering that series and doing a great job. He's a great storyteller. I'm jealous of him because I have always wanted to go to this series in Coral Gables.
Mhm.
There's something different about this series when it's in Coral Gables, and Miami gets especially in football, and I think there's maybe something to it in football, kind of has a reputation of being a fair weather fan base, or a fan base that's just, you know, pays attention on the surface level and isn't really locked in. But the Miami baseball fans turn up, and especially for a big series like this, they're really going to show up in numbers out to Mark Light Field. And Mark Light Field still has some charm. It's got some nice amenities, but it's not a palace like we see so many of in the SEC. So it still kind of has that old school college baseball feel that I think makes games there feel special. You know, and they play 2 of the 3 games at night. Miami's one of those teams that plays night games on Friday and Saturday. And so those games at night just kind of have an energy and an electricity to them
Mhm.
and that's true for a lot of Miami night games, but you're talking Florida, Miami in Coral Gables with 2 of those games at night. And like, whoo boy, that's, you know, that's a put the kids to bed kind of situation, or
Yeah.
send the kids to go get a Mark Light milkshake, right, and have them
Mhm.
stand in line so that you know, their eyes are shielded. But that'll just be a lot of fun. Miami's a team that I don't know. You know, the new coach has, you know, they really haven't had any issue winning the regular season. But they struggle in the postseason. This obviously is a regular season series. That's not relevant necessarily, but it just kind of leads me to say that I don't know what to make of Miami pretty much constantly. But I can guarantee you the series is going to be a lot of fun, and it'll be kind of a toss up thing because this series just runs so hot.
Yeah. All good points. I I love that, you know, you do have the rivalry series and it's on the weekend. Okay. So a lot of times these teams face each other and it's on Tuesday night and you're seeing the fourth guy versus the fifth guy, or
Yeah.
you have guy, it's Johnny Holstaff or whatever.
Yeah.
You're going to have best on best early in the year. We're going to find out what people have, right? Young pitchers get their first opportunity against a conference type opponent, big atmosphere. The other thing that's always interesting about this series is, yeah, they play in late February, early March, and often they play again in June because they do get paired up quite a bit. So it is kind of interesting to see if, you know, what you learn from this, because down the road, um, you know, quite frequently they do get paired up again. So yeah, but I agree. This is a fun one, really is.
You, you know that meme from the Office, Mark, and if I'm sure you've seen it, but if you don't, I'm sure a lot of listeners have, where Michael, Dwight, and Pam are standing in the conference room pointing finger guns at each other in a circle.
Yeah,
Like that's kind of like the postseason between Miami, Florida State, and Florida.
yeah.
Like history lately a little less so because Florida State's fallen off and Miami is getting eliminated in regionals more often than they would like. But you know, kind of used to be, you could pretty much set your watch to 2 of those 3 teams playing in a super regional somewhere.
Yeah.
It felt like anyway. And so yeah, those teams kind of all have to go through each other. And there was a time when you could pretty much also set your watch to those 3 teams being all in the top 10 and top 15.
Hmm.
um, that has also happened less often. It would be great if it got back to that, but yeah, there's this series will be electric kind of regardless of what either team is doing or not doing at that point of the season. Third weekend also big weekend for the rivalries. You got Miami, Florida, Clemson, South Carolina, which you talked about, and Georgia Tech, Georgia that
Hmm.
weekend. So we did not talk about Georgia Tech, Georgia. I've been to that series. That is a good one also, but kind of feels like maybe a rebuilding year for both teams. We'll have to see in
Hmm.
2024. We'll have to see what that produces. But okay, Mark. So you have kind of your own list. You accrued
Yeah,
you know something for each team. Talk me through some of the stuff we didn't talk about. Just kind of rapid fire through some of it, and
yeah,
if anything gets left on the table that I have written down, I can circle back to it.
yeah. I'm really interested to see Ole Miss hosting Iowa. That's a 3-game series. Uh, Ole Miss is a team that we really, you know, that they had such a struggle last year. We don't know what to think. Are they back? Um, we'll find out, because as we talked about Iowa, this is a really good club, And instead of a one game tournament type of setup, you're going to see them three times. So really excited about that one. Alabama, who at press time has not released the bulk of their schedule, they are going to play in a tournament. I think that this one's in Frisco, right? So they're going to play Indiana, Arizona, Dallas Baptist. That's three really good opponents. So that's Alabama's a club we don't know a whole lot about because they're, this roster turnover, so many returning guys in different roles. I do think, this is the kind of weekend where you can learn a lot about a team like that. And I think maybe the other one I would mention is you mentioned Auburn. They're going to host UConn, and you don't have to tell you UConn's always good. And this is the kind of early in the year. It's a resume builder for UConn. Auburn's got them at home. That to me is a really fun series. And again, it's that third weekend where with seemingly all of those good series are occurring. So that was probably the highlight for me.
You can set your watch to a couple things when it comes to UConn. It's a phrase I've used a lot today, set your watch to. But there's two things you can count on with UConn. One is that they're going to go on the road and play a team like this in February or March and either win the series or scare the bejesus out of them.
Yep.
And then come Selection Monday, they're going to be on the bubble of something, the host bubble or the at-large bubble. They're always just going to be on the edge of whatever they're trying to get to. That's kind of life when you have to fill out a midweek schedule with a bunch of Northeastern teams that may or may not be good, and you play in the Big East. And even before that, with an American that was kind of slipping. That's just kind of been their life. So, but it's a great series. I made that trip, that's the second weekend of the season. And I'm sorry, the third. And last year on the second weekend of the season, I went and saw Ole Miss play Maryland. So this is something that Ole Miss, kudos to them for scheduling traditional 3-game series like this. I mean, it is at home, sure, but you've got a really good opponent here. You've got excuse me, not Ole Miss with Iowa and Auburn with UConn. I kind of inflated the two there, but you know what I mean. But kudos to them, even though they're home series, for playing series against good teams from different regions and testing themselves in that way. Because you're right that it is a little bit different with 3 games versus just a one-off in a tournament. So
yeah, those are the best two, I think. For 3-game series at home
in terms of series, certainly.
Yeah.
I mentioned Georgia Tech, Georgia. We kind of went over that. We glossed over, Kentucky playing in the Round Rock tournament. That's the tournament they're in. Washington State, rebuilding there. It feels like they have been a little bit hurt, just like Oregon State with the Pac-12 dissolving or, getting busted up or what have you. So maybe some rebuilding there, but Texas State, a good club. Kansas, maybe low-key a good club. Our colleague Aaron Fitt did their fall report and really kind of liked what he saw. And that was a spunky club last year. So that's not going to be any sort of rollover there. That also is a UK versus KU matchup, which would be really exciting in basketball. And then hopefully it will be in baseball. So we'll have to see about that one. Then kind of wrapping up some of the tournaments here. Tennessee, the first weekend plays at Globe Life. You talked about that a little bit. They've got Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Baylor. Certainly the Texas Tech game, I anticipate, that being a hotly contested one. Oklahoma and Baylor, less sure of what to expect there, but those are 3 good games. Texas A&M also plays at Globe Life the third weekend against Arizona State and USC. That's kind of a weird tournament because TCU's out there also, but Arizona State and USC are not playing each other because they're conference opponents. So TCU and A&M are going to play one of those teams twice while they're out there. So that's kind of a wonky deal, but interesting to see, 2 West Coast teams coming and playing 2 Texas teams. That's when you consider the West Coast doesn't typically do a lot of traveling into the middle of the country to play and stuff like that. I think that's a cool deal. And then Vanderbilt is playing in the deal at Minute Maid Park. They've got the Cajuns in Texas, which, those teams are playing LSU. They've also got the University of Houston. And, Vanderbilt's a team that doesn't always play in these types of tournaments. They do on occasion, but they're not a team that does it annually. Like, I talked about with Arkansas, for example, or A&M tends to be in one of these things every year too. Vanderbilt, not always, but we've talked a lot about their pitching. And again, I don't know what to expect offensively from Texas. That was a team that wasn't great offensively last year. Houston, not sure there. And the Cajuns typically a good offensive club. Matt Deggs with his, pack mentality style of baseball there. We kind of know what we're going to get there, and that can create some interesting offensive situations. So that might actually be a really interesting test for a talented Vanderbilt pitching staff, because when you play the Cajuns, it's not just about getting their hitters out. It's about managing the inside game and fielding bunts and pickoff moves and holding runners and, all that stuff. You have to play clean defense. So that could be potentially an interesting matchup there. So there's a little something to be interested in with every team here. Mark, you did a good job of kind of looking through every club's non-conference schedule and pulling those out. So there's a little something for a fan of every SEC club on these schedules. Even amidst some of the weaker weekends, you're going to get at least one weekend where with your team where you're going to get a really good feel for, at least early on, where they are as a team. And I feel like that's the best use of non-conference play.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm probably the only team I don't think we talked about was Mississippi State. I would say, the highlight there is Georgia Southern comes in for 3. It's a couple years ago they were hosting, kind of a surprise host, and took a step back last year, but should be another one of those Sun Belt teams that are going to be a handful, right? So it's a pretty good home series.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia Southern's going to have some talent. That's kind of a standard there with them. And for Mississippi State, you honestly, with their needs for 2024, you can't really blame them for not necessarily putting their team in a position to play some marquee competition early, because that's a club that I think it's going to be important for them to get their legs under them early. That's going to hurt the RPI and stuff. But if you're Mississippi State, you're not really worried about that so much as you're just worried about, hey, we just need to not get rolled in the SEC this year. And one of the benefits of SEC play, as we've both alluded to here on this episode, is that, you win enough games in the league, you're probably going to be fine. There aren't that many examples historically of SEC clubs that, scare up a 500 record in conference and don't get in. Shout out to 2015 Mizzou or whatever it was, whatever year that was, but pretty rare, right? So
and that's changed. I mean, at this point, I think if you win 15 SEC conference games, you're going to get in.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think it's just the math has changed.
Yeah. So for State, and this goes back to the point of, scheduling can be a lot of different things to a lot of different programs. And for State, you just, you need to get some wins early and get those guys feeling good. I think that's more important than any sort of RPI or strength of schedule, anything that they can do there. So understandable from that standpoint. So a lot to look forward to. We will continue preseason content from us is coming up here pretty quickly. So it was good to take this look at the schedules and start to get a little bit excited about what we're going to see. We've got at least one, perhaps a couple of episodes still to go, more traditional podcast episodes still to go here in January before we get into season preview podcast. But here in the next 3 weeks, we will jump back into our series of a podcast for every team in the SEC. And if you weren't with us last year, first of all, we're glad to have you. But what we did last year is did a 15-ish minute episode on every SEC club. We will do that again this year, and just we release them interspersed throughout the preseason. So it's a real quick episode. If you're a fan of just one team and you just want the lowdown on that specific program, you can do that and not have to listen to the rest of it. So we hope that's a convenient thing for you to be able to get a download on. And if you're listening to this podcast and you have not subscribed to SEC Extra, Mark and I are not salesmen. We don't do a good enough job of this probably, but we would be humbled. We'd be honored if you are just a podcast listener who listens to the free feed. If you would come over to d1baseball.com, click the SEC Extra tab and consider subscribing. Now is a great time to do it, because we're getting ready to start previewing the season and then jump into the season. But if you sign up for an annual subscription, that will take you through summer ball, where we're going to have a lot of coverage on SEC players from the Cape, from Team USA. And then obviously we jump right back into the fall and preview the next season. So signing up now would give you a window into really that full cycle of the way we cover SEC baseball at SEC Extra. So again, we would be humbled and honored if you would consider doing so. Use the code FALL20 to get 20% off that annual subscription at d1baseball.com. That goes for any subscription, but again, we would love it if you would give us a shot here at SEC Extra. So be on the lookout for all of that in the coming weeks. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra. over at d1baseball.com. Thank you to Mark, as always. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. And thank you, the listeners, for listening.